Is
Hi,
it this one?
Tim. Yes, this is the one.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
你要下一頁，你話俾我哋聽，我哋幫你翻，好唔好？
Oh, okay. Oh, 係我喐唔到㗎。Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Can I start now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay. All right. Okay. This topic is about personal data protection, and because of the COVID-19, instead of a presentation and a workshop, it's been condensed to 1.5 hours. So we have a very compact schedule. So we'll start with the presentation, and then we have a case study upon which you have a breakout for 20 minutes. Then we come back for the second part with the analysis, as well as some second part and the concluding remarks. And then we have a small Q&A. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide, please. Okay. Okay, I can move it now. Okay, now, what is currently the hottest topic internationally that affect the personal use of social media? The Hong Kong team would know, but not the mainland team, and there's a reason for it. Okay, and let me say what it is. It is actually data sharing between WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the international, the hottest or the largest platform for messaging and voice over IP, and Facebook has 2.7 billion people as mainly a social networking. And for because they are banned in China, so it's an equivalent of Weixin, WeChat. WeChat also have payment gateways and all that. But you think about that in that combination. What Facebook has sent to all the Facebook owns WhatsApp, and all the WhatsApp's users has got a message and saying that unless by February next month you give us the formal agreement that I can share your personal data with Facebook, then you are not allowed to use WhatsApps anymore. And so they caused quite a lot of confrontation, quite a lot of social issues with this particular directive. And okay, so let me tell you what I wrote, and it would yesterday to my friends on this topic, and it will give you a much better understanding. First of all, what Facebook is doing, what it has been doing to most of its users since 2016, when it provides an opt-out, i.e. you can refuse to share your personal data in WhatsApp with Facebook. Now you cannot refuse if you want to continue to use WhatsApp. The main point, but that's important, is that in WhatsApp, all your messages continue to be confidential to you and with whom you share, because it's encrypted. Nobody else can read and access, which is the major use for WhatsApp. But Facebook will continue to capture WhatsApp, your personal data. For example, telephone number, how often you use WhatsApp, how you interact with other users, the language you use, time zone, so as in Facebook's word, to provide, to improve, to understand, to support, and to market Facebook services, meaning they can do more targeting marketing, more effective marketing to you in doing business. So unless you have opted out in 2016, or you joined WhatsApp after 2016 when you didn't even have the opt-out, there is no change to your WhatsApp experience. So if you've been okay with WhatsApp so far, why change? If you switch to other messenger and voice over IP platform like Telegram or Signal, but that means you have to rebuild your personal cyber network, and also assuming your friends would also mutually switch. However, if you only now realize what Facebook has been doing all along in accessing your personal information, and you do not like this level of privacy intrusion, so quit and switch, fine. My final point to my friends and to you is that personal data privacy is a very personal thing. Some don't care. Some are very annoyed of privacy intrusion. in the digital world, there is generally a personal trade-off and choice between free service, good quality, good convenience, and giving up a level of your personal data privacy. So if you look at this two screen, we talk about personal data, which is a personal interest, your personal right, the protection thereof, vis-a-vis business interests, like marketing services. And people are concerned with privacy intrusion, and it is a very important topic in the digital world, thereby the title of my presentation. Now, let's talk about what is privacy. Privacy, very succinctly, very briefly, is the right to be left alone. There are different kinds of privacy. For example, territorial privacy. My home is my castle. All intruders will be prosecuted. I don't like it. So that's my privacy. There's also surveillance privacy. I don't like to be followed. I don't like to be tracked. All right, this is my right. And we are talking here is personal data privacy. It's the interest of you in controlling the information held by others about you. So this is the topic of my presentation. Why is it so important? If you look at the history of data protection, personal data protection, in the good old days before computers, in a room full of files and your data are scattered along different files, it's very difficult to identify you or to know more about you. It's what we call practical obscurity. But with the advent of computers in the 70s, when computers could store at your fingertip, they can store, they can collect, they can analyze, they can display and disclose your data just at what we call just a tap on the keyboard. All right. So we start using computer in the 70s. In the 80s, we have global networks. So therefore, all your data could be distributed right across the world into different computers. In the 90s, the internet went critical, meaning that and a old platform that used just for academics, for email, have enough users critical for business to take notice, and we started off with e-commerce. And in the 2000 millennium, we have the rise of social media, digital marketing. We have new technology like big data to do more in-depth analysis. We have AI and biometric recognition for tracking, for surveillance, for your own good or maybe for the national interest. And so all these, why personal data protection is a global issue. So why is personal data so important? Why is it in the digital world? You look at these two quotations. Data is the new oil. It's valuable. If it's not refined, it cannot be used. So it needs to be refined and changed into valuable commodities. But the more important is the second quotation. Data, particularly personal data, is a new oil of the internet and a new currency of the digital world. Currency, we talk about wealth, we talk about value, all right? So whenever there is wealth, there is value, and particularly this wealth and data are now virtually in all businesses. They use internet, all computers are mainly connected, and with their storage, with billions of gigabytes of data generated every day. If it's wealth, it's value, what happened? There will be a lot of people who want to steal it. They want to use it improperly. They want to do frauds to steal it from the users on the internet. And who are these actors? Who are these hackers? Who are these people? And what effect they have? Example, your team's mostly young people. So when you're younger, I'm sure you remember, or you are still playing, using PlayStation, digital games owned by Sony. And back many years, quite a number of years ago, there was 77 million players were data breached. The data includes email address, name, and even credit card details. And these are value to the crooks, to the frauds. Another one, the whole nation is kept hostage because the entire nations in South Korea, the credit card database were hacked, including the entire cabinet and the president. If you've been to the US, you would have gone to Target, which is a mega store, the retail store chain, very popular. And back in 2014, around Christmas, more than 100 million customers, their data were hacked, were breached, with name, social security, credit cards, and all that. Okay, so we have a lot of crooks out there. And so what do nations do? What do jurisdictions do? Well, they'll have a law. The law to protect the citizens from all kinds of fraud. And this one, we're talking about protecting personal data. And in Hong Kong, if I use that example, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot something. Yes, not only crooks, but sometimes organizations also improperly use their own data. Octopus card, which is the very popular Hong Kong transportation and cash wallet card, it has a loyalty program with 2.4 million customers, provides all kinds of discounts, and the corporation actually sold these data, customers' data, to banks and insurance companies and credit card companies for direct marketing. All right, so this is not, they are not external hackers. These are organizations who seemingly have misused the customers' data. So in response, jurisdictions or nations, have personal data privacy ordinance. They have law. And this is exactly what it should be: protect individuals' right to privacy of personal data. But there's also another reason for these kind of laws. For example, the EU, the European Union, has very strong data protection laws, protecting their own citizens' data. And they say that, hey, look, if other nations, if your country does not have the equivalent law to protect my citizens' data being sent across to you, sorry, we would not allow our citizens' data to be transferred or sent across to your country. And in a lot of e-commerce, a lot of data flies left and right. So this creates a what? It's almost like a data embargo. It means a trade barrier. It's a trade embargo. So it impacts economics. So therefore, there's also economic element in this kind of law. Now, in this kind of law, all these laws have one very common component. They are called data protection principles. They're almost universal. They're very similar. And if you understand these data protection principles, you would understand the essence of the law. And in Hong Kong law, we have 6 data protection principles. First of all, personal data is that it relates to a living person. So if you're dead, we don't care about your privacy, okay? Data define that this data could identify you, and it exists in a form in which access and processing is practicable, meaning in computers, in files, whereby you can, so all that would be part of the definition of personal data, all right? Data usually is an equivalent to an organization, that collects and use data, and the persons involved in the organization. So they are called data users. The 6 data protection principles are very simple, very logical, and easy to understand. Principle 1, and let me use a bank. Okay, when you want to open an account in a bank, all right, so the bank say, okay, I have to let you know the purpose of why I'm collecting your personal data. It is really to open your account and to maintain your account during the course of your account existence. So therefore, and quite rightly so, I need your name, your address, your ID number, and okay. Now, so you need to define the purpose. And when you collect the data, it has to be lawful, it has to be fair. And the final point in principle 1 is data should be necessary and not excessive. All right, you cannot just, for example, back in the 70s, I still remember when you apply for a credit card, the bank are also, of course, ask you for your particulars and all that. They also ask for your father's and your mother's name. Why? Because back in the 70s, maybe still now, if you are in debt, sometimes your parents will help you out. All right, so they want that as well. But nowadays, it would regard as excessive. So that's principle 1, purpose and manner of collection. Principle 2, very simple. Personal data, if you keep it, it should be accurate as possible. It should be up to date, and also the retention kept no longer than necessary. So if I delete my account from the bank, you should delete all my data. That is generally true, but sometimes a bank, because of other laws, accounting, might keep it for a longer while. However, but the general essence is that if it's no longer, the purpose is gone, delete the data. Number 3 is a very, very important one, use of personal data. That means that I supply data to you for a purpose like a bank, opening my account, maintaining my account. You cannot use my data for any other purpose, all right, unless I consent to it. So there have been examples like in a conglomerate which owns a bank and a e-commerce platform, and they would use the data collected by the banks for opening accounts, maintaining accounts, and use it for direct marketing. That is not allowed unless you say it's all right, unless you consent to it. Use includes disclosure, all right? Use includes telling other or letting other people know in an email and whatever, disclosure. Number 4, once again, very, very, very necessary, security. All practical steps ensure that the data held, in this case by the bank, are protected against unauthorized or accidental access, processing, erasure, and all that. Security, okay? And the level of data security must become commensurate with the harm that can result. For example, if it's medical data, if it's financial data, that means you might need more protection to ensure its security. And this includes your data centers, physical locations, filing cabinets, and all that, security. The last 2 is more about the community. Principle 5 is that you must have a policy. If I'm a customer of the bank and I go to the bank and say, look, what data do you collect? How do you use it from me? What data do you collect? How do you use it? Do you store it? Do you display it? Do you provide other people? So it's a policy issue. Finally, principle 6. In any open society, that means that they allow the user to access personal data, his own or her own personal data. That means I can go to the bank and say, look, if you hold I know you hold my data, or if I don't know, but if you hold my data, please give me a copy, all right? I want to know only my personal copy, nobody else, only my personal data. And if I look at it, if I feel that there is some error, I'm allowed to seek correction, all right? So this is a right of any individual. So these are the 6 data protection principles. These are very simple, very understandable, very logical, and I hope you agree with me from the elaboration. However, okay, however, your personal right in any society has to be balanced with what's known as public interest. What's known as public interest, because your right is not absolute. It has to be balanced with the right of public interest, the right of a society. So therefore, they are known as what are, in all these laws, they have exemptions. Exemptions. What do you mean? Like, for example, if the police or anti-corruption suspect that you are doing money laundering with your account, then the law enforcement can go to my bank or go to your bank and say, okay, I want to know their transaction. Give me the details about this person's account because of a possible criminal offense. Now, and the bank usually cannot provide the data to other sources because it would not be the same fulfilling the purpose of the original collection. However, but because of detection and prevention of crime and serious improper conduct, dishonesty or malpractice, the bank, under good reasons and rationale, will provide your data, your banking data, to the law enforcement. Okay, so they are using that as an example. There are various exemptions provided in all these data protection law. Freedom of the press is another one. Sometimes, you collect data and then because of public interest, freedom of the press, then they would disclose it other than the original purpose of collection. Okay, so there are various others. I use those two as an example. Okay, now, so that in a nutshell is, through this personal data protection principles, you will understand the essence of all the main laws on data protection in the world. All right, they have data protection principles, they have penalties, they can make prosecutions, but also they would have exemptions. The exemption meaning that it can be, in some cases, non-compliant to the law, meaning non-compliant to the data protection principles. Okay, so that is the main now. Okay, so I have talked a bit about the advent of data privacy, personal data privacy. I've talked about the importance of personal data in the digital world. I've talked about since personal data is the new currency in the cyber world, in the digital age, people want to steal it, people want to misproperly use it. That's why we have laws to protect citizens against or for data protection. The exemption in this law, there are data protection principles in this law. Okay, so with that background, I'm going to ask you to do a very simple case study. It's a real case. It's a real case. And this is actually, the case study is about, it was as a survey made by the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data some time ago. In Hong Kong, we employ a lot of foreign domestic helpers, and their employment agencies that actually would play the role of collecting applicants, who want to, from other countries, who want to work as domestic helpers in Hong Kong, and they will collect the data, all right, such that they would allow prospective employers, to understand, to select, to choose, and to negotiate, and then finally to recruit them to help in their home, all right? And these employment agencies, and we have 400,000 of domestic helpers in Hong Kong. So it's a lot of activities concerning personal data relating to these employment agencies. Now, what do they collect in terms of personal data? Now, these employment agencies collect it, and then obviously for people to view, for convenience, the public to view, they publicly disclose this data online in their websites. So what do they collect and what do they disclose? Obviously, the names and passport number and all that, to be able to identify and allow the contact information. And also for allow people to select, they want information about this applicant, what they look like, the photos, where they're from, their nationality. Some people prefer Philippines because in Hong Kong, they can communicate well in English. And so, so there's a common media of language. And what they look like, the age, work experience, education, personal habits, smoking. I don't like smokers, so no way, religion, so marital status, number of children, have they so. So all these are information that help the selection, as well as personal data of family members. All right, sometimes they want to know, okay, the employment agency might say, oh, okay, if it's in a large family, so they can get used to people, they are not loners. So for very reason, they also personal data of family members. And definitely from the reference point of view, have you got the experience, all right? So So what's the personal data for, of former employees? Where are they? Who are they? Do they have children? So if you are looking for a caretaker for babies, you're looking for, hey, has he or she worked before as a baby armor? All right. So all these, from the employment agency perspective, they feel that all these are necessary to be collected, and then they will display it on their website to be scanned, to be viewed by prospective employers. Okay, so these are the data they collect, these are the data they disclose. Okay, now what I'm asking you to discuss either in group or on an individual basis, depending on how B4B administration has worked out how you actually tackle this issue in groups or on singly. The discussion is very simple. It's a collection. We talk about collection. It's a collection of these data I mentioned by the agency. It's the collection in compliance with the data protection principles in the ordinance. This is principle 1, all right? Data protection principle 1 in the Hong Kong law. Now, second discussion point is the use. Use includes public disclosure of these data by the agency. Are they in compliance with the data protection principles, in this case, principle 3 in the ordinance, use? This is the two things you got to look at in your 20 minutes of breakout. Now, to give you some guidance, like in considering any data privacy case, in fact, you can use this for when you are dealing in your business, in your dealings. If you ever have to think about personal data when you collect data or collect information, you can apply this to all the scenarios that they're dealing with personal data. First of all, are we talking about personal data? If the guy is dead, you don't have to worry about it, all right? Okay, are we dealing with personal data as defined? And is the data collection lawful? Is it fair? Is it excessive? Is it proportional for the collection purpose? Okay, and also equally important, you will find that in a lot of privacy commissioner, yes, you can, okay, you can collect this data for the purpose, but are there any other alternatives which are equally effective, but less privacy intrusive? All right. Okay, so there might be other ways, So this is to do with excessive minimization of collection of data and therefore minimization of privacy intrusion. Are the personal data collected display accurate? This is principle 2, collect, in terms of accuracy. And are the personal data collected for a purpose or related to, are they being used for a purpose other than the original purpose upon which the data collection took place? This is principle 3. And also, even though you can use it for the purpose, but are they used in a way which is beyond the very, very important nowadays reasonable expectation of you, of the data subject? And finally, are there any exemptions applicable which allow for the non-compliance of data protection principles? I gave earlier on an example, to do with law enforcement, about the banks giving data to law enforcement. All right. So are there any other exemptions applicable? Exemptions, different law, in main they are similar, but of course there are some local or parochial kind of differences. Okay, so this is the end of my part 1 of my presentation. You have now 20 minutes to have a breakout and discuss the 2 points I just made. Okay, and also in front of you there should be a copy, a physical copy of the case, as well as these slides are in so you can look at it and then discuss it. I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. Thank you.
透过案例来说，所以里面你有很多该那个要问的几些问题，尝试一下，尽可能。国家的写的条文有点不一样，但原则是一样的。6，你现在要分组，分3组，刚才是大概这么组的对吗？第一原則是單3組，第二就是盡量把。
哎呀，唔好意思啊 ，Candy， 我唔好對唔住，唔知點解忽然間唔見咗嗰個，我都揾唔，即係佢撈唔到上去。我第 second part 我撈到，但係第一 part 唔知點解撈唔到，唔好意思啊。你真啲 N OK？ 佢哋有冇幫我喐啊？
有的 ，Steven， 我是幫你一直跟着你說的，Steven 對唔住啊，你一路講我哋一路幫你 scroll 咗落底下嘅。你 mute 但佢聽唔聽到我講嘢㗎？咁但我而家聽唔到佢講嘢咯喎。你而家開翻佢啊！你哋同佢傾一下好嗎？我哋呢度開始咗先啦，因為這段時間先他一直說比較公平的來看啊，好嗎？那現在就分開3組，做一個用工的招聘、資料搜集跟發布這個場景。討論一下有沒有過度，有沒有被保護 ，OK， 好嗎？這頁它的你放哦，對，我就先放在這裡吧，你這可以看。其實原則上的6個原則，你都是看着來說，好嗎？來，分組3組，現在11個人，3組大概就3到4個人左右，3到4個人，好嗎？盡量分開不同的打散開 ，OK， 好嗎？因為對這個 case 有沒有問題？這是要 answer 還是 question？ 這個是看要求你去討論的過程裡考慮這些因素，對，就是最後就是它有沒有違反的6個原則，有在哪裡違反？
这里有3、4組、5組、6組，
沒有，
有一些打散了分代表。
第一組，你們3個人。
Now, okay, that's what our study. You understand the case study, so I don't have to go back into it again. And the discussion is about collection of data by the employment agency. Are they in compliance? And also the public disclosure, which is part of use of these data for displayed in the public website. Okay, now, okay, these were the data were originally when the applicant applies for inclusion for consideration as a domestic helper in Hong Kong. These are the data that are collected initially, right at the beginning in a big application form, collected from the applicant. Okay, and these are the data, as I said before, were collected. Now let's look at all these. First of all, identification and contact information. Obviously, we need that in order to establish contact and identify. So the collection of these for the purpose of the consideration for selection as domestic helper. So the collection is all right on identification and contact. The second one is then we talk about, all the attributes, this photo, nationality, religion, marital status, and all that. Now, all these, I think, from the commissioner's point of view, are relevant to the purpose for prospective employment. So, collection okay, all right? The third one is personal data of family members being collected right at the beginning. Now, it's nice to be aware of his family members, and these data, for example, would be necessary if there need to be emergency contact for the applicant, if there's anything emergency or something related to contact the personal data. Okay. However, the commissioner found that right at the beginning, until there is a prospective employment in serious consideration and processing, then you will need to have the personal data of family members or a family member, as I said, for emergency contact. So right at the beginning of data collection, this is the commissioner deemed this as excessive at that stage. It's only when the selection process is reaching a fruitful stage, then you might need to have this information, in particular for emergency contact in a later stage during employment, so on and so forth. So the commissioner reckoned this is collection is not all right. It's excessive at the initial stage. So that is in contravention of data protection principle 1 in terms of excessive data. All right, the final point is on the collection is personal data of former employers. Now that is, as I said, I think you agree with me as well, is that to be able to have a look at what were these former employment in terms of to get an idea of reference of his or her experience. That is important. That is important. However, initially at the stage of consideration, until that is serious in terms of selection, then the prospective employer would say, okay, I'd like to really to be able to talk to the former employment for or any additional issues that he or she, the prospective employer might have. And so therefore the commissioner reckoned is that this personal data is fine as well, all right? So collection of these is fine, okay? So that's on collection. Now, public disclosure of these data on the website. Identification and contact information. Now, right at the beginning, when you're just consideration, you're selecting, you don't really need to know the applicant's name, its passport number, and all that. All this should be displayed maybe application 1 or application A and all that. You don't need that on the public website. That is an excessive. So therefore, disclosure of identification and contact is not all right. It's not all right because it is not really necessary for initial selection. However, the next one, information, you know, all these attributes about what she looks like, how old she is what's its marital status, number of children, all that. I'm sure you agree that is relevant in formulating a selection criteria. So that is fine. Disclosure on the website is fine. Okay. Personal data of family member. Okay. Now, as before, that this is really, to be honest, is not okay because you don't really need that, all right, in order to for the selection process. Finally, the personal data of former employer, name, nationality, occupation, address, telephone number, and all this. Yes, this information, some of this information are necessary. However, if you do not need to actually have his name, his address, his telephone number, all right, until when there is really down the line, when selection is really serious, then this could be informed to the prospective employer. So they say, yes, some of the disclosure, the experience and all this, what it does is relevant for public disclosure, but not disclosure of his name, address, telephone number. These are not all right. But obviously, number of family members, age of children, so to check out, you know, particular for baby armors, for example, these would be relevant for consideration at the selection stage. So it's only partially okay for this public disclosure. Now, this is a very, very simple example, but it does try to give you, to let you know, what does a commissioner of personal data, all right, a privacy commissioner, the way he looks at, you know, he consider, you know, a case, he consider what's been collected, what has been used, and then he apply the data protection principles to ensure whether you are in compliance. So it's a very simple example, but let you have a feel of when you look at a particular case or when you look at particular activity that relates to collection and use of personal data, how you actually apply the data protection principles, particularly in terms of purpose, specification, retention, accuracy, and all these, and use, subsequent use of the data collected. I hope that has been useful in the introduction to the essence of a data privacy, personal data privacy law, and how it could be applied in terms of assessing any activity that involves the collection of personal data and the use of personal data, etc. Okay, so that closes the case study. I hope you have get a feel of what I just talked about. Now, let me get on and say, okay, now earlier on we did actually look at a few data breaches and improper use. What happened to them, you know? That was what was discovered. But what happened? What's the consequence of a data breach to an organization or improper use of personal data by an organization? Okay, talk about the PlayStation data breach. If you look at that, 77 million players the data were breached. It includes credit card details and name, email addresses and all that. The consequences is horrendous. Financial analysts estimated Sony lost $1.5 billion US. Like, for example, they will send just a letter, all right, or to replace credit card for 30 million, for the millions of users, 77 millions of users, just the information dispatch and the cost of information, of informing is $300 million, okay? So this is horrendous. The other one is Target, you know, that large mega retail chain in the US. Okay, they reckon it, the analysts also reckon it cost them $1 billion. Well, but notice the second bullet. It has an impact on the senior management. The VP, the CEO for IT, and the CEO have to resign over the data breach incident because of the societal repercussion. Think of the CEO. He has thousands of employees, and he has millions of things to worry about, cybersecurity, data breach, and all that on his mind, but he's not directly involved in the securities and all that. However, I'm sorry to say that responsibilities comes with accountability. And so the VP has to resign, the CEO resigned. So most of you are prospective CEOs or now CEOs of your company or in the future or senior management, beware of that. Octopus. Now this one, as I mentioned, is an internal decision to improperly use data collected for loyalty program and incorrectly use, you know, for direct marketing, for selling the data of loyalty club members. Okay, so and what happened there? The commissioner then looked at the law and say, okay, I need to tighten up the law on direct marketing. So it impacts a lot of the industries and professions in terms of the law, tightening up of direct marketing, use of personal data. And once again, as like in the Target, the chief executive has to resign. Okay, so the impact is, but this one is because it is more internal. So therefore, accountability as well as responsibility. Okay, so therefore, if there's a data breach, there's a lot of hard costs to corporates. Okay, sometimes, you know, particularly with banks and in financial insurance companies, if you have a data breach, then there is a fine. These are just examples of a lot of dollars. And you have, particularly in the US, in other countries where there's class action, the user community is very upset, and so they would have class action. You have to pay compensation payments, a lot of money in the US. Cost, crisis management, okay, damage control, the notifying, like in the PlayStation case, millions and millions, you know, the cost is horrendous. And then of course, then your lawyers got involved and administrative. So it's a lot of hard costs. That's why, remember in the PlayStation Sony case and in the Target case, it's over $1 billion in terms of cost. But do not underestimate the soft costs, the diminished, brand damage and the reputational damage. The more important is loss of client, equally important, loss of client trust. Because there's so many options now on cyber world of any business and similar business industries, switching is not an issue. And a lot of people switch if they discover that there's a security breach of his own data, very, very upset. And correspondingly, then there's an impact on business, there's impact on competitive edge. So beware of data breaches. Now, because of all these very, very horrendous kind of data breaches and all that, Europe has always been, European Union has always, Europe has a tradition, has a culture, has a history of safeguarding privacy, and in this case, personal data privacy. And they have a new law back just 2 years ago. It's called GDPR. You will come across that if you ever sort of start dealing with customers or doing business with European Union. So they have a new privacy law, and that law is an update of already a very, very strong law back in the last century. But the main driving force for having a new law or revised law reflects the title of my presentation, that protection should remain effective in the digital age. So it has all the things that we have in a normal, like in the Hong Kong law, but in addition, they have, for example, I'll give you some examples here because of time. A right to be forgotten, all right? When the right to be forgotten, that's a very interesting one. When the individual no longer wants his data to be processed and there's no legitimate ground to retain it, the data will be deleted. Okay, so therefore a right to be forgotten is something that's really, really sort of modern in this age. Easier access to one's data, all right? So individuals have more information how the data is processed. Information must be available. A right to portability. I don't like your service, please move my data to another service provider, all right? So now, let me just look at this. Okay, now this one, and let me tie that to the recent announcement or the directive from Facebook on WhatsApp. I mentioned it's an international promulgation, an international message to all the WhatsApp user that they want to share data. You have no option, no opt-out, except in Europe, except in the EU, because EU say you cannot do that, and that is the provision that for the recent directive from Facebook. It said it's going to all the users except European Union, And just a couple other things. If there's a data breach, you have to inform the authority. You have to inform all the affected users. In the Hong Kong law, it's an option. But even though people do actually let the commissioner be aware of there is a breach. And the next point is very important. Data protection is by design and by default. Data protection has to be built into all the products and services. So it's not a by the way. That means that data protection right at the beginning has to be designed into all your systems, all your procedures. It's not a by the way, there's a law. It's not. It is fundamental, all right? So therefore, they have an entire methodology called data protection by design, all right? And finally, the penalty is horrendous. It's horrendous. It's up to 4% of the global annual turnover. So you have $1 billion company, they can fine you up to $40 million. But let's look at, I just stuck up this year. the 2020, the biggest fall. Google was fined $56 million in France for harvesting data not transparent for e-marketing. A huge retail shop for H&M in Europe, all right, fined $47 million. Now, this one is interesting. Monitoring hundreds of employees, is there too aggressive and a lot of infraction in terms of how they monitor and use private information of their employees, all right? In Italy, telecom, big company, a too aggressive direct marketing strategy. And British Airways, that one is once again interesting. British Airways database was hacked, which affect 400,000 customers. They were fined because the authority found that this was preventable. They do not have adequate security to safeguard their databases, and they got fined. So it's a whole variety from security, direct marketing, to data, to employee data, and all that. So it comes in different ways, different forms, but you look at the amount of fines, they are horrendous. Okay, so remember that. Okay, I'd like to conclude, but something to take away. All right, first of all, this is the digital age. We have a new business operation model. We have mobility, we have social networks. We use big data, AI, and AOT to collect data, big data, AI to analyze the data for all kinds of reasons, for marketing, for product, for customer retention and all that. Right at the beginning, I said data is key, and personal data is a currency. It has value, it has worth, and so be careful of misuse, be careful of hackers. And data privacy, if you look at what at the current, the largest sort of issue on the cyber world about WhatsApp, about Facebook, there's a lot of repercussion. Why? Because data privacy, particularly personal data privacy, is the top of mind concern for customers. And privacy law are responding to protect the individuals, protect users, protect customers. Look at GDPR and the EU law. Okay, so remember that we are now in this digital age where personal data and its protection are primary concern and issue of the community. So if you forget all I've said so far, but I hope you take away this one. Organizations should treat personal data employers and employees and clients. Remember your client and remember your employees, not as owner. A lot of people always say, oh, I collect your bank, I collect the data. What do I use with it? I own all this data. No, you are not the owner of personal data you collected from your customers, from employees. You are the custodian. You are just the custodian, all right? You host this data on behalf of your employees, on behalf of your customers, okay? So once you use, the mindset will be completely different. If you don't think yourself as owner, you know, like in Octopus, all right? They use to collect the data for loyalty club, and I own this data. I can do whatever I want to do with it, so I sell it, all right? So, but if you're a custodian, you don't own this data, your entire operational mode, your procedures, your policies will be very, very different. However, but just a custodian, the important thing is, but be a creative custodian. Think of it as a synergizer. What's the word synergize mean? It's combine or work together in order to be more effective. So you have to work with your employees, work with your customers to ensure that even though I don't own the data, but can we have in a win-win kind of situation? Can we work together in not only in compliance with the law, but in a way a win-win such that both side management and employees, management and customers are happy with the way there's a choice, there's a give and take and all that. And give regard to reasonable expectation to do role reversal. What do I mean by that? If you have a procedure, you have a new activity, your procedure, how to handle, how to collect, how to use personal data in an activity. After you finish, this is what you want to do, then you turn it around and say, look, if I were a customer, if I were an employee, would I be happy if my personal data is being collected this way, is being used this way? All right, do a role reversal, and it will tell you a lot more about the sentiments, about the emotions, the expectations of what we call the data subjects, you yourself, okay? So, and this final slide is build an organizational culture for data privacy awareness is on the word continuously for sustainability, all right? I can do a separate half an hour talk just on this one, but the essence of this is that build a culture, as the GDPR reminds. Personal data protection should be fundamental. It should be not a by the way, it should be by design, it should be by default, all right? And your commitment must have senior management commitment to do a cultural shift. And in execution, you would actually have, how do you get this besides the commitment? There are 4 components. You must do it with structure. Then you must have the management structure to ensure personal data is protected in collection and being used. And you will couple it with policy, all right? Policy like, for example, I should never use USB for hosting personal data because of the mobility aspect, and people get, and a lot of lost case with USBs, for example. Resources, you must have enough people in cybersecurity, you must have enough people who understand personal data protection, you must have people, like if you have a data breach, you can assemble a virtual team, HR, legal, security, IT, all right, enough resources. And finally, technology, you must have effective technology. The personal data and its intrusion and its improper use is because of computers and IT, because of technology, all right? But equally, you use technology to fight it, all right? You build technology in terms of like authentication, like checking for accuracies and all that. The technology aspect is you fight technology, you use technology to fight the technology if it's being used improperly like hackers. So this is the culture. Remember this, okay? Remember the final thing I said. If you run an organization, you do not own the data, the personal data of your customers or your employees. You are just a custodian. That mindset and the culture of building an organization to protect personal data is absolutely prime, important in this cyber world. With that, thank you. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢 Stephen。我们在现场跟那个线上的同学们有什么问题想跟 Stephen 交流一下，甚至有一些疑惑，就跟他分享一下，问他一下，有没有？好 ，Matthew。
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thanks so much for the sharing. I have a specific question to ask about the store transaction data. In every physical store, they print out a receipt which contains the store transaction data, the membership data, even some credit card info, also some for business promotion text are also printed on it. So in terms of data privacy principle, how do you classify this type of receipt data?
Well, like as I mentioned, in any activity, if you, in this case, for example, you have a slip, which is a printed piece of paper, which actually disclose, you know, credit card details and personal name and etc. As I said, in looking at any activity, you look at, first of all, is this personal data? Yes, it is personal data. I got a credit card number here. I got a name here. What did I use it? What was the original purpose when I collected these personal data? And if the disclosure in this slip is part of, all right, of the purpose of collection, then it will be fine. If it's not, then you cannot do it, or you get consent of from the subject, from the person that provided the data in the first place. Now, this is a very generic answer to your question, but that's what you do when you ask a question like this. You look at it and say, when I collect the data, what was the purpose of collection? Now, when I'm now using it, I put it on the slip, you know, disclosing a credit card and all that. Was that part of the original intent, original purpose? But of course, you know, when you collect the data, obviously this is the customer data, all right? You make a sale and you have a slip, you know, to let. So part of the purpose originally would have been say, okay, I collect the data to provide service to you and to make sure you can keep all the information for you to remind you of our services. And then you have this slip and it's given to the customer, and that is part of the collection. But that's part of the original purpose for collection. However, that slip, you should not disclose it to anybody else but to the person. Otherwise, there will be a security issue and the disclosure issues in terms of use.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can I go one step further to probe? Since the government will use this data for taxation purpose, the landlord will use the data to take a percentage cut. Even marketers will use the data for shopper engagement. So in this context, we have multiple stakeholders which can use the data for different purpose. This is a quite concrete use case.
All right, I can have multiple, there are multiple issues here. One is, okay, it's a slip, so it is for reporting for revenue and all that to the authority, right? Now, as I mentioned, that there's a public interest, there is a personal interest, you know, in personal data. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you have to present these to the authority because there are other laws that demand the usage of such. All right. So therefore, there are different laws. So therefore, there's a public interest involved. So therefore, you could actually do that. But in terms of marketing, all right. Okay. Okay. Before I say that, now in your original purpose of collection, you said, okay, I'm collecting this data for providing a service to you and to be able to provide you with a record of this service, as well as for any particular sort of government requirements, government law regulations upon which I need to present this data to. Now, that will actually cover the government angle. But as far as use it for direct marketing, some people took the slip for whatever reason, they got it. They do direct marketing. Maybe it's a subcontractor to you. But if it's not a subcontractor to you, all right, then you say, hey, you know, this is outside the purpose. So if something goes wrong, it's not you. It is the direct marketer. It's the direct marketer. If it's an outsourcer, then actually when you present data to an outsourcer, then you would come together, what you are a subcontractor or whatever, then you'll come together to protect yourself. You'll say, okay, I'm passing this data to you. It is used for that purpose, which is coincide with the original purpose. But if you use it in any other purpose, then it is on your head, not me. Because if a commissioner or authority comes and talk to you, they say, okay, look, I have already mentioned in our contractual terms that they can only use it for a purpose, and they're using it for anything else different, you are protected. Okay?
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, Roger.
Hello, Stephen. Thanks very much for your great presentation. And today, your presentation quite focusing on the personal data and our business, haven't seen. quite focusing on the building data. So currently in mainland, since we are doing business here, and we are not quite clear of the criteria of the market criteria, since some clients are very sensitive to the building data, since this data may be relevant to its revenue, its performance, energy data and comfort data. But for some clients, especially state-owner clients, they are not very, they do not, sensitive to this. So I'm afraid if there's some, mature code or standard currently in Hong Kong or in some, developed countries, which we can refer to. So.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me say this. First of all, if you're talking about data or information relating to a building, right? Relating to the building, that is not personal data. That is not personal data. However, if that building is in a set of data that includes, for example, the name of the person who owns the data, and the fact he owns this building is also part of his personal data. All right, first of all. And secondly, I think you're talking about mainly about in China and in other countries, they have different laws relating to personal data. In China, I know that we have a whole set of different directives, regulations, and law that actually have personal data protection built into them, like in consumer law, like in cybersecurity law. But in China, we don't actually have what we call an omnibus law, like the Hong Kong privacy law, which just solely deals with personal data. So it doesn't matter. Different countries have different ways of handling personal data. Some countries have omnibus law, law that just on personal data. China has a whole variety of regulations and all that. Okay, so so therefore, if you have business dealings in other countries, make sure that your local unit or people responsible for that territory understand about what's happening in the local jurisdiction about personal data. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions? Particular on the Zoom, on the virtual place, and any questions? No. Stephen, I have a personal question as an employer in China, because of the power of social media. There's so many opinions on the cyber world. Particular, there's some opinion from our employee. Say they will express their opinion on the product, on the client, and particular to me as an employer. In China, there's many monitoring systems to monitor the public opinion, including the opinion from the employees. And with this monitoring system, they will build this monitoring into the appraisal system, or even the demotion, the dismissal program. Is it an intrusion to the personal information by this action?
That is a very, very big area. First of all, in the Hong Kong law, if you express an opinion, and this opinion is from you as a person, that opinion is also considered personal data. Okay, that's the first point I want to make. And therefore, so let me boil it down to something simple like a performance appraisal. Okay, sometimes with the law in Hong Kong, there's a personal appraisal, and the person, the employee being appraised, sometimes, or they have the right to go and demand and say, okay, because remember the data principle 6 in terms of the right to access personal data. All right, so they could demand an appraisal from the employer. And opinion is also is part of a personal data. So therefore nowadays, when people do appraisal, used to be they said, hey, you are a terrible lazy bastard, you know, kind of thing. And nowadays there's an art in complying with the personal data law. They're going to say that, well, I think as a general point, I think there are different ways to express, you know, that you're a lazy bastard. All right, you can say, okay, I think your time keeping might not be as good as it should be. All right, so therefore, even if your appraisal detail is being reviewed or given to the appraised staff, all right, so there would not be a lot of commotion or emotion involved in terms of how you express yourself, because opinion is also considered a piece of personal data.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? No? No? Okay, thank you, Stephen.